Thank you for sticking around. I mean, everybody else except for that person walking out right there. All right. So, interesting things going on here. So after I sold my last company, I was living out in the UK, thinking about where we were going to start Hubba. And we could have stayed out in the UK. We loved it out there. Could have moved down to the Valley, have great networks down there. Could have gone back to move to New York. But we had a hypothesis that Toronto has the ingredients to be the best place to start a technology company. And the hypothesis was right. It is. But for some reason, we still seem to compare our community up against a whole bunch of communities outside of Toronto. And those communities are glamour and glitzy, and they have that Hollywood story, and they're attractive. And I'm not sure why we do this, but we do. We're not those communities, and there's a good reason for it. And it's not because we're different or because we're better. It's just that we're earlier. We're just in this like weird, awkward teen phase. And it gets ridiculously awkward around here sometimes. So Toronto, like, don't get us wrong. There is no better opportunity right now to build the world's best tech center than being right here in Toronto. And it's up to all of us to do that. But like any, I guess, maturation, there are some things that we need to do to grow, and there's some things we need to stop doing. So let's talk about some of those. We need to quit blaming other people. We all know the stories. You know, there's a lack of seed capital here. There's a lack of growth capital here. Corporations aren't buying our stuff. Government's not buying our stuff. The talent here is too small of a pool. It's all true in many cases, but it's not up to them. It's up to us to be able to persevere through this stuff. But it doesn't mean that you need to accept it. In fact, you should be doing the exact opposite. That framework that we have the ability to break through it, but we have to do things. When we moved back here, we knew that we wanted to build a huge global institutional company here in Toronto. And we knew that the talent pool was great, but it probably wouldn't be enough to support us and support all the other emerging companies that are around here. So we thought about what we were going to do about that. And you can do a few things. You can either work on really early stage humans, like high schoolers, get them really pumped about technology, get them through university, and we have those programs, and that's great. They take a little bit of time. You can also go out and you can get a whole bunch of really smart people from other countries around the world and bring them into Canada, which we're great at, and we do those programs as well. But the part that was really, really interesting, and the part that I love, is the ability to take our existing talent pool and the existing community that we have around us and unlock some of that potential. And there's lots of different ways to do that, but the easiest way for us was to figure out how we unlock it in underrepresented groups. There's so much talent there that can be used in the Toronto technology community. And how do we do that? When we were 5 people, we had about $2,000 in the bank. We saw a hashtag. It was said, hashtag ladies learning code. And the first thing that we did is we found the founders and we said, we're going to throw everything we possibly can behind you. A little bit of cash, as much effort as we possibly could. And now that organization, 5 years on, even though we're just a small company as well, has worked with 40,000 women across Canada, has workshops in 13 cities on any given weekend, and has fundamentally changed that framework. And we've hired a bunch of people out of there. That's one way to do it. We have our own initiatives at Hubba. We're actually announcing one on March 8th, so keep your eyes open for that one. But whether you do your own or whether you get behind somebody, you have the ability to change the framework that we work in. But you have to be careful not to lose focus. Building a company is very hard. Building a community is even harder for the most part. And tech blogs are great, and Facebook groups are great, but it's important not to get distracted. Right? We need to do really important things here, and we have to keep focused, which means we have to be very careful not to cut down others. We do this a lot, and this is the sign of an immature ecosystem. It's a characteristic that we have. But imagine if all of us came together, we're able to support each other through the community. And we have to be cheerleaders for each other, because here, nobody else will be cheerleaders for us. Which leads us to this. And this is one of my biggest pet peeves in the entire community here, is the difference between the words humble and humility. And people have different definitions, but let me explain what I'm talking about. We get painted as the humble Canadians. And this goes back to what Mike is talking about as well. Being humble means, you're not a promoter, you kind of have this kind of low value of self-importance. I don't know many founders like that, yet that's what people point to us when they say the Canadian founders. On the flip side, you talk about humility, the ability to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to be vulnerable, or I'm going to be wrong sometimes and I'm going to learn. I'm going to have empathy. Like, humility is great, and it's one of the best traits of founders around here. So as we go through this, humble versus humility, one is probably the worst thing that we can do, and the other one is probably the best thing that we can do for ourselves. So let's make sure we focus on the right thing. This is a big one that you see in lots of different communities. So I use the word builders all the time. And it's great that we have wonderful VCs that we can grovel to every so often, and we have, accountants and lawyers who've been in this 10 times longer than us. And we're lucky that we have them here. But make no mistake, there are two different segments in our community. There are the builders, and then there's everybody else. The builders are the founders and the people that work with them, and then there's everybody else. The community builders, which is great, government, which helps us, great institutions, some of the feeders of the community as well. But there are two distinct groups. And don't forget who's at the top of that hierarchy. In addition, this is another important thing that we really screw up here that we have to make sure we don't forget. And this is coming from a guy who has 4 white male executives on my team. This is a problem. We can't pretend that this isn't a problem in the Toronto ecosystem. I've learned from a lot of people who have taught me time and time again, and I'm very grateful to it. And this happens in a lot of different areas. Things like what we used to do at Hubba, anybody hiring an engineer, you always look at their GitHub projects, right? What do they do on the weekend? What are the really interesting things? That's great. But a lot of single moms aren't working on GitHub on the weekend, right? They're not working on their projects. Or we had recruiting sessions early in the mornings. There's a lot of different religions that have early morning prayers. And even at Hubba, if you ever come to our office, there's about a half flight that you go up. It took us 2 months to realize that the elevator doesn't actually go to our floor. Nobody ever used it. So anybody with disability or accessibility issues couldn't actually get up to our office. And these things aren't malicious. We're just blind to them in some cases. And we need help to see those a little bit more. And this isn't about leveling the playing field. This is just about getting everybody to the playing field. And the last piece here, this I think is the most damaging piece of this one line that we get everywhere. And this is how it manifests itself, right? You have one job, you have the junior engineer or back-end developer, whatever it is, and you look at it and you say, you know what, he has better skills than she has. I'm going to hire him. You put that aside. Now, you have a new job coming up. You look at it again in isolation. He has better skills than she does. Now you put it aside. Now you've got 2 people that are very similar. And the way that you kind of push that away is you say, but I'm just hiring the right person for the role. Right? It's the biggest fallacy, I think, in our entire community. And the next biggest fallacy is when you hire that third person and you say, I'm just not going to lower the bar. Right? We hear this all the time. Now, an important thing that we learned at Hubba is we don't hire for skills. We hire for people who are going to enhance the experience of people around them. We have a high-octane team. It's a high-performance team. If you're going to come into Hubba, it's because you add to that. You amplify that. And if you're going to amplify that, I don't want a bunch of people who are the same. It doesn't matter about the skills. It barely even matters about the ingredients that you have. It matters about your experience. And if you think about it that way, there's no way that you want a homogeneous team. Okay, so this is a big problem. And all of the data shows that this is the right thing to do, and it's very strange to be in a situation where the right thing to do is actually the best thing for your business. So the last part here is very simple. We live in really interesting times here. And as a community, we have a voice, and we can have impact. So it's important to take a stand on things. So we have an opportunity here to build the best community in the entire world. Not one of, but actually the best one. But it's going to take all of us to do that.
Questions?
Sir.
Oh yeah, amplify the experience. What are you looking for now? How do you assess it?
Yeah. So we
Repeat
have
the
50
question.
people now. How do you amplify the experience? I can point you to Leanne, who actually runs hiring for us right now. But it's pretty simple. We've developed something pretty special, we think, at Hubba. And it was because of the way that we hired. We now have 50 people. We can go to 100 people immediately. How do you protect that special as you move forward? And a lot of that is identifying what is great for people, and what are the characteristics of great people, and then how do you put them through a proper process to make sure that you're protecting that special. The biggest thing, and just kind of for everybody else, I know it's a little bit out of our book here, but the number one characteristic that we look for is empathy. It turned out to be the most important thing when you're dealing with people, because of the respect that each individual has to each other. We know that people have different backgrounds. We want people with different backgrounds. We want people with different quirks. They have to be able to respect each other, which means you have to put yourself in the other person's shoe. That's the number one characteristic for us. So how do you actually hire for that? How do you put them through a recruiting process for that? It's all a pretty systematic approach that we took to it. Okay.
Anyone higher up?
End of the night.
Jason?
Thank you, Ben. All right.